Who's doing that? Oh, it's me. Welcome to chess, ladies and gentlemen. You know, I just like doing something crazy and fun and you know, just dumb when I first get on the tube. Anyway, welcome to chess, ladies and gentlemen. I'm covering another game from the candidates tournament, trying to see who will be challenging Magnus Carlsen later on in the year for the World Championship. See if Magnus Carlsen can repeat his title performance from previous years. It's been, I think, 8 years now. 2013 was when he thieved it from Anand. But yes, all of my people coming from the Philippines, Magandang umaga, Maayong buntag, Kaibigan and Higala. Kamusta to you guys. Appreciate you guys very much for stopping by. Anybody who's coming from France, bonjour to you. Bon petit déjeuner. Ça me fait plaisir de te voir, mes amis. Appreciate you guys very much for coming and stopping by, taking a look at my video. French is actually one of my better languages, so I can speak, you know, kind of like more broad than some of the other ones. Some of the other ones I only know like 1 or 2 words, stuff like that. But anyway, for all of you guys that are ready to go, let me not hold you up. Let's get rolling. So I have Fabiano Caruana versus Maxime Vachier-Lagrave. So if you guys are ready to go, let's take a look and see what we got. Let me get my volume up real quick. Heck, as Key and Peele, they said in their skit, get my adrenaline up. Some of you guys might not know what I'm talking about. All right, cool. So we have E4, C5. So we have the Sicilian defense. So we have knight to F3. We got D6, D4, pawn takes D4, knight takes D4. And probably about 85% of the time when you see a Sicilian played, these are going to be the lines that they go down. It's just pretty much the strongest way to play for both white and black. We see knight to F6, knight to C3, and probably 99.9% of the time you're going to see A6, which is the Najdorf variation of the Sicilian. So for all you guys that love, you know, saying openings, this is definitely one that everybody is pretty familiar with, the Sicilian Najdorf. So we see bishop to G5, which is one of the strongest ways to play against the Najdorf. We see F4, and we see E6, and then we see F4. Another line that is very, very strong for white is going to be queen to F3. That's going to be the most commonly played move after these series of moves. After something like bishop to E3, you might see bishop to E2, castles, and queen to G3, or you could see castles here. Both are legit. Basically, the idea is that after castles and queen to G3, you have the bishop controlling this diagonal, more importantly, this square. So when you do threaten checkmate, let's just say like, you know, black plays something random. When you do threaten checkmate here, the knight can't come to H5 and, you know, protect against the checkmate. So you have to go to E8. It's just a little sample that they have. Anyway, F4 comes. We see queen to B6. And we do see a pawn gambit in this position. So we see queen to D2. The queen takes B2. We see rook to B1. Queen to A3. Now, you know, white is losing a pawn, but black is kind of overextending themselves just a little bit to get themselves in this position. Because as you can see, they've only developed their knight and their queen. So, you know, they are very, very behind in development. But this is actually pretty legit for black. This is definitely not like a lost position at all. And this is actually a very well-known theory. This has been played, I think, almost 200 times in professional play. So it's pretty trodden path here. So we see E5, we see H6, bishop to H4, pawn takes E5, pawn takes E5. We see knight F to D7. We see knight to E4. And then we see... you know, of course, if we got a little bit greedy for black, and we take here, we would see knight to B5. And the problem is you have checkmate on D8. So you don't really have a way to defend against that, and your queen is under attack. So we definitely don't want to get pawn grubby here. Don't turn into Yasser Serouans. So the queen takes on A2. We see rook to D1, and queen coming up to D5. And then we see queen to E3. And like I said before, this is all, like, we're not in novelty land at all. This, as crazy as this position looks, I mean, you're looking at it probably, you're thinking, okay, wait a minute. Black has 6 pawns, white has 4 pawns. Like, how can white be okay? White is actually okay. I mean, like I said, this is something that has been seen before plenty of times. It's a real roller coaster when you look at the computer evaluation. Like, the computer really isn't even sure who's even fully winning. Like, because you'll have it be up here, then it'll go down here, be up here. It's crazy. So we see queen takes e5. So that's another pawn that drops for white. We see c3, bishop coming to c5. And then we see bishop to g3. And this is the novelty of the game. We have already seen bishop coming to, let me see. No, bishop to e2. Bishop to e2 is the move that was seen already. And so, you know, bishop to g3 is the novelty of the game. It's pretty clear. I mean, you're just wanting to kind of knock this queen away to a less desirable square. And of course, as you guys know, you don't really have a lot of options because the queen is kind of almost stalemated. So you either have queen to d5 or queen over here. I didn't look at queen over here, so I'm not sure if it's like, you know, there's some problems there, but it doesn't look the best maybe to go over there. It'd be a little too far away. So the queen comes to d5. One thing I do want to note, if we kind of step back here just a touch, after the move c3, something that was actually quite strong for black was actually bishop to e7. After bishop to e7, you do allow your king to be damaged as far as castling goes. So bishop takes e7, king takes e7, and we have knight down to f3. And it gets pretty crazy. The queen pretty much has to go to c7. We see bishop to e2, knight to f6, knight to d6. So, you know, immune from capture for the most part because you don't want to take with your queen because you're just going to be luring the king back out in the open area with the queen. It's not where you want to be. So the rook will come to d8. After knight to f5 with check, the king comes back to f8. We see rook takes d8, queen takes d8, queen to c5 with check, forcing the king over. And then we see queen taking on c8. Of course, the idea if the queen takes, you're going to be forking the pieces here. So that was actually like a line for black that was really, really strong. So like I said, we didn't have that. We had bishop to c4 after queen to d5. So it kind of looks like you're trying to deflect the queen over. Because you're dreaming of like a check situation here on d6. The bishop is covering that. So this is a little bit stronger for black. So we see queen takes c4, bishop to d6, and then we see knight to f6. This is what was actually played in the game. If we back up, we don't make knight to f6. I want you guys to stop the video here and see what is a very, very strong alternative for black. And it centers around a certain concept that I talk about sometimes. You guys have heard me talk about it in previous videos. So like I said, go ahead and pause the video and see what's a good move here for black to play. All right, cool. So for those of you guys that watch my stuff, you guys know I always talk about trading material when you're either up or down pieces. When you're down material, you do not want to trade. When you're up material, you do want to trade. So as black, because you have so many pawns to the good, it's definitely beneficial for you to trade in this position. And the move here to force the issue is going to be bishop takes d4. The bishop takes d4 just eliminates a piece from white's position. And like I said, I mean, you have six entire pawns here against 3. So if you can reduce the amount of minor pieces and major pieces, you know, you're going to end up with a pretty nicely won type of game. So the pawn would take d4. After queen to d5, you see probably bishop to a3, king to d8, and you see castles by white. And then now black comes with f5. And as you can see, all really black has to do is kind of start developing the rest of their pieces. And they literally just have 3 extra pawns. And they're just doing really, really good. So this is actually, I think, a critical point in the game where black had a real chance at a severe advantage. This is like a completely winning advantage by black now. So going back to what we had in the game, we had knight to f6. We had knight takes c5. So now we've just won an entire piece for black, or for white. The knight comes to d5. We see queen to e5. Rook comes to g8. Knight d takes e6. Pawn takes e6. Knight takes e6. Queen takes c3, forcing the trade of queens. I guess not necessarily forcing it. You do kind of want to take in this position here. Because after queen takes c3, knight takes c3, and then you do have the ability to fork here with knight takes c, or knight to c7 with check. And then you have king to f7. You have rook to d3. Not taking the rook immediately, but attacking the undefended knight. So that's kind of an important thing there. So we have castles by white, and then the same deal. You know, we throw a little in-betweener move there before we take the rook on a8. And so we see knight to c6. We have knight to b6. So as you can see, everything is equal except for the pawn situation. And that's the crazy thing about the situation. You are up in exchange, but you are down 2 pawns. And the thing that makes it more significant is the fact that you have 2 completely passed pawns here on the queen side. So it's possible you might be able to get something rolling with that. So the rook comes to d8. We see knight takes c8, rook takes c8. We have bishop down to a3. We have rook to c7. We have rook to f4. Knight back to f6. We have bishop to b2. Trying to see if we can cause some type of damage to your structure here by trading. The knight comes to f6. We have bishop takes f6. Pawn takes f6. We have h4. We have h5. We don't want to see any of these, you know, pawn pushes here. Deflecting the king and then being able to take the pawn. We don't want to see any of that. So we see h5. The rook comes to g3 with check. We see king to f7. We have rook to g5. Rook to c1 with check. We have king to h2. We have knight coming to g6. And we have to maintain this pin, of course, because we don't want to just drop our rook. So we have to back our rook up on that file. So the rook comes to f2. We see knight takes h4. Rook takes h5. Knight back to g6. We see rook to h7 with check. King comes to e6. Rook takes b7. So as you can see, white is starting to kind of like equalize the material. They've gotten a lot of their pawns back, and they are up this exchange. So this particular position is significant for white. Even though it's very hard to push through this type of an endgame, if you were to trade rooks down and have a rook against the knight and you have a couple of pawns, it's not just, you know, completely won. So it does take some technique. So the knight comes to e5. We see rook to b6 with check. And then we see knight coming to c6. Rook takes c6, knight takes c6, and then we have king to g3. I'll just run through these moves. We have a lot of maneuvering, and then I'll show you when we get to the critical point in the game. So we see king to f7. We have rook to c2. We see knight to b4. Rook to d2. We have knight back to c6. King to f4. King to g6. Rook to d6. And so something's going to have to give there. So the knight comes to e5. We have rook takes a6. We have knight to f7. We have rook to king to e4. Knight to h6. Rook to a5. Excuse me. We see knight to f7. Rook to a3. Knight to d6 with check. We see king coming to f4. We have knight to f5. Rook to d3. Knight to h6. Rook to g3. We have king to f7. We have king to e4, knight to g8, king to f5, knight to e7 with check, king to f4. So basically, black's objective, even though they are down in material, is to try to hold the position that they're in right now. And then also to maintain this king in this area, because you can't allow this king to penetrate into your position, because then you're just going to have a favorable, like, you know, king type of situation where you can do some sacks and stuff. I'll show you kind of like a couple different variations there. But the knight comes to d5 with check. King comes to g4. King comes down to g6. We have king to f3 with check. King to f7. We have king to e4. Knight to e7. King to f4. So we've repeated the position twice. So, you know, it's kind of looking like it could be a draw. So we see knight to d5. We see king to f5, knight to e7, king to e4, making sure that we avoid king to f4, because then that would be draw by 3-4 repetition. The knight comes to g8. We see rook to h3, king to g6, rook to a3. We have king to f7, rook to f4. We see knight down to h6, rook to g3, knight to g8. We have king to g4, knight to e7, king to h5. We have a knight to d5. And this is the critical point in the game where black starts to give up their position. So the rook comes to f3, and this is this was the key move that Caruana found, because it's starting to put black in a zugzwang. You're going to start to try to move your king up and put yourself in a position where you can start to push this pawn. So the king comes to e6. We see g4. King comes to e5, and then we see king to g6. And like I said before, this is the key position. These are the key positions that we're in, basically to make it to where now white is going to be able to start to force their way through. So It was actually in this position that Maxime Vachier-Lagrave did resign the game. And I'll just show you two different variations that could have happened from this position. The top two moves that the computer was suggesting was actually knight to f4 with check. And it's kind of tricky because you definitely don't want to trade, because once the king takes, you take, of course, that's going to be a draw. So it's kind of like a little trickery the computer's trying to do. But then also knight to e7 was another move. But it just allows the king to come up to f7. And really, no matter what black does, you're going to be able to trade into a favorable endgame. So if the knight comes back down to d5, you know, first you want to interpose. First you want to Zwischenzug rook check on you know, f5, and then after the king moves away, now you can take on d5 and then get into this position, or you can also take on f6 and get into this position, which is almost the same thing. I think it's different, a little bit different, yeah. But it doesn't really too much matter where the king is exactly positionally, because you know this pawn is pushing forward, and it doesn't really matter. I don't even think you have to move the king. I mean, I'm just gonna do this real quick. I think you just pretty much just automatically yeah. You're just going to be able to, you don't even need the king to move. So, you know, the king is just like completely shouldered away from the action. So, that was that game. It was a long one. I tried to make the video like short, not like crazy long. But that was a very long game. It was 74 moves. But it was a game I really wanted to show. It was a suggestion by my guy Reginald. Appreciate the suggestion, man. And so I went ahead. I was like, man, I'll go ahead and do that game real quick. But Maraming salamat po sa nanonood ng aking mga video, aking mga kaibigan, and merci beaucoup, mes amis. Au revoir. And I will see you guys next time. And I appreciate it very much. All right.